maybe this is going to come off the wrong way, but I think AI is making it harder, not easier, because it's amplifying crap and sloppiness and lack of clarity. No one wants another toy that does 5% and looks impressive in the first 5 minutes and then falls apart later, right? It's always like technology, people, and process. You can have the perfect tech and the wrong people, you're going to fail. So you need all three. No one wants to buy anything that just creates more work for their teams. Instead of renting people's attention off of media companies, why don't we just earn that attention by becoming the best resource for security professionals? And we did that for over 10 years. Most people are really shitty managers and they're just really bad at delegation. In order to be good at delegating, you need to be able to describe what you're trying to achieve, why you're doing what you're doing.
And before we begin, a quick thanks to Stifel Bank. From venture debt to general banking, they provide world-class support to my portfolio companies. Now on to the show. Welcome to the Unpack podcast, the podcast for operators by operators. I'm your co-host Vignesh, and I'm a partner at Sierra Ventures.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us again for another episode. I'm Arvind, your other co-host, partner at Geodesic Capital. And today I'm very glad to have a friend, Marcel, CEO, co-founder, or maybe just the founder, I don't know. He can educate us, of GrowthX Labs, as they call it. And I'm sure he's going to tell us a lot more about it. But, Marcel has had an interesting career traversing tech, a lot of great tech logos that he's going to talk about. But, enough of me and over to Marcel. Hey, so I think welcome to the pod. And the idea we always start off with is to learn a bit more about the individual's background and what led to doing what they're doing right now. So the floor is yours. If you could sort of, surmise for us what you were doing, how did you connect the dots to getting to where you are?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Let's see. I'm originally from Brazil, born and raised, grew up in Texas, and started a career early on and actually large enterprises like IBM and HP. And I think one of the big insights that eventually led me to where I am was the fact that I just noticed how crappy most marketing was and how wasteful it was. And we were just spending so much money in, at the time it was popular, content syndication. So brands literally spending millions and millions of dollars trying to give away their best content into a media company in order to try to get growth, right? And so one of the things I did, we had acquired this Israeli cybersecurity company, and I pitched our general manager on building a media company called securityintelligence.com. And so it was the first ever site to be allowed to be off of IBM.com. And it lasted over 10 years. It just got folded back into IBM.com this year, very successfully though. And the whole idea was, instead of renting people's attention off of media companies, why don't we just earn that attention by becoming the best resource for security professionals? And we did that for over 10 years. I wasn't there for the whole 10 years, but it became the biggest source of pipeline. The first year we did about 47 million in pipeline, and I think about 17 million in attributed revenue for that business unit. And out of about 300,000 in investment in the program. And I was literally just going around trying to find the best security professionals to publish content. And so that was kind of the beginning of kind of how I started. I eventually got poached to build something similar to HP, where I built this contributor network, over 1,000 contributors, started publishing 20 plus pieces of content a week, and grew to over 1 million visitors a month, became over 50% of leads for that business that eventually became part of Micro Focus. And finally decided I'm so sick of babysitting VPs at large enterprises to make a decision and let's go build at startups. And lucky enough, landed at a company called HashiCorp. I was there, it was about 100 employees. I think we were just over 6 million in ARR. In 2 years, we went to 100 million and 500 employees. And I was leading growth, and that I just started to see again content and community being such a driver of growth for that business. I built something similar at Service Titan again with content and community, and then finally it was at Scale AI. I was their first and only CMO for a couple of years, and it was really about how do you even market data labeling, right? And human labor, essentially, low cost human labor. And so it was about not talking about the product at all, and instead trying to position the company alongside the foundational labs. And so I did these 3 different conferences and really positioned the brand to be the main data provider for these labs like OpenAI and eventually Anthropic and others. But all of that led to then when I was at DeepGram CMO there, just trying to figure out how can I use AI plus experts. Having come from a data labeling background, I knew how important humans in the loop were to driving the right outcomes. And so what I started to do was just build AI workflows and then figuring out where in the loop can I put the humans in order to drive more outcomes and more outputs that would drive the right outcomes. And so we did that. And eventually I started teaching workshops on how to build AI workflows for marketing. And that became really popular. And that's eventually what led to GrowthX, which was ultimately, hey, we're just going to sign up to do the whole thing end to end: strategy, AI workflows, and last mile execution in order to accelerate the outcomes. And it turns out it was a no-brainer for most companies. And so we've been doing pretty well since.
Appreciate the background, Marcel. This is maybe a question more targeted at founders that are thinking about starting their own companies. And you definitely didn't pick an easy market. MarTech is obviously a big market, but it's also a tough market with just how crowded it is. How did you eventually kind of figure out the right sort of positioning in a category like that? Like maybe just walk us through the early journey. I know a lot of the pain points came from your personal pain and personal work, but like, how did you figure out where the white space was?
It's kind of interesting. I think it maybe is counterintuitive. I see so many founders trying to find a pain somewhere and trying to find a market, and I think for me the best way was just solving my own pain. Perhaps not every founder can have that, but at the very least, you should put yourself into the job and sign up to do the job, right? And that's usually where that's reflected as you're either hiring someone to do that job and measuring how that job becomes successful, or you're already hiring some kind of either service provider or partner to help solve that, right? I mean, in MarTech, you mentioned there's over 14,000 tools. Like, no one wants to buy another effing tool. No one wants another SaaS, right? No one wants another toy that does 5% and looks impressive in the first 5 minutes and then falls apart later, right? No one wants to buy anything that just creates more work for their teams, because it's really hard to find really great talent and their teams are already spread thin. And so what people want is like, how do you accelerate my path to driving these outcomes? And for me, it was like, hey, normally what I would do was I would hire some people on the team, like a head of content or something. And then I would try to hire a bunch of freelance editors, and then I'll buy some tools, and then I'll try to stitch it all together and then come up with the right strategy. And then I'll buy more tools to measure the outcomes and see what was working and not working, and then manage the whole thing stitched together, right? And that always took like about 6 months to hire the right people, onboard the right tools and all of that. And you're not moving any numbers. You're not driving any outcomes in that process. And so I see, like the other day, we're hiring a chief of staff, a second chief of staff for special projects. And I was interviewing someone, and his last company didn't do very well, or they ran out of money. And I kept digging on this. I kept asking him, hey, what would you do differently? Assume 6 months ago you were the CEO. Like, you can do anything. And it's like, oh, I would define the ICP a little bit better, and I would do this and that. And I was like, why not just sign up for a service? Like, what you were doing, what your company was doing, like, there's so many companies that would have paid millions of dollars. And then in that process, you can figure out what does it take to actually, make this more client operated, if you will, customer operated. But like, it's just that I think VCs and investors maybe try too hard to have everybody fit into buckets. And then everybody wants to be a SaaS, or everybody wants to do infrastructure. And it's like, why? Like, figure out what companies care about and figure out how to package it in a super easy, no-brainer way. And then you figure out the messy part, right? Like, Scale wouldn't have been successful, Scale AI, had they said, hey, we don't do LiDAR annotation, or we don't do this. Like, no, we'll do the whole data here. You give us your requirements, and then we'll return that data. Don't worry about what happens under the hood,
Yeah. I must make a comment there that HashiCorp and Scale AI are both portfolios of Geodesic Capital. So thank you for being there. I think your commentary, let's maybe look at it from the lens of the buyer persona, right? And the buyer persona, and please define it for us, who you think it is. But I guess there are a couple of questions associated with it. One is, what are the biggest problems that they're dealing with, right? I mean, if it's the marketeer, for example, or other persona. And to your point about what parts of the value chain is your company now disrupting? I think, AKA also known as, what tools you're sort of not, the marketer doesn't need anymore. So I think if you could help us understand the pain points and the value chain and what you're disrupting.
So the way I kind of think about it is every brand on the planet wants to grow. And ideally, they want to grow in a way that the more they grow, the easier and cheaper it gets, not the harder it gets, AKA not outbound or ads, right? Ads, the more ads you do, the more expensive it gets, the less it scales. Outbound's the same thing, it's diminishing returns, right? It can work and it can be a great way to have additional channels. But the foundation of that is organic growth. How do you grow organically and sustainably, right? The atomic unit of that, in my opinion, is content. Like you look at anything that is marketing or anything that builds trust with your audience and helps build distribution, at the core of it is content. It's words, it's images, it's how you communicate knowledge, information, is how you build credibility, right? So for us, like content is the atomic unit. The outcome is growth and organic growth. And then the who is usually marketing, but sometimes it can be the founder itself. It can be, the product team, like with Webflow, we work directly with their chief product officer, right? And with Lovable, for example, is the head of marketing and the whole team. But then there's many, many other companies where you're working directly with the founding team or whoever's in charge of, waking up every day and figure out how can this company grow faster and better, right? And so the way we kind of think about it is that's kind of like how we define the space in the category, I guess. And ultimately to do that, you need to have a deeper understanding of your company, your space, your product, your audience, right? And that informs then what are the top questions and things that audience cares about that will drive the biggest impact to your visibility, both in AI and search. And traffic, like people actually coming to your site, because although a lot of people think websites are going away, that's still where most interactions and transactions happen for the business, and it's still the most valuable marketing channel for most businesses, right? And then ultimately conversion, right? And you want to do it in a way that is both with AI codifying a lot of the expert work that needs to happen in order to become the best answer to those questions, and also in a way that you can pull in the right experts, the right humans that bring the right judgment and creativity and connecting of the dots, right? And you want to do it in a way that with every output, you learn from those signals and the next one gets better. And so that's kind of how we define the whole thing. And so the way we position externally ultimately is a little bit different. We don't try to sell a platform. We don't try to sell like a service with people only. The way I think about it is like, it's always like technology, people, and process. You can have the perfect tech and the wrong people, you're going to fail. You can have the perfect tech and the right people and do the right thing in the wrong, or the wrong thing in the wrong order, and you're still going to fail. So you need all three, right? Except most companies are not great at recruiting the best talent. Like most companies are going to have a hard time hiring the best AI engineers, the best design engineers, growth operators. Because a lot of those people, they want to work, be challenged in different ways all the time. They don't want to work with just one company. They don't want to put their entire careers on one single company, right? And then the tech is pretty hard. Actually, building agentic AI workflows, there's a lot more to it. Ingesting all these signals, prioritizing the opportunities, like it's a pretty hard technical challenge. And then finally, like the process, like people, that's why there's over 100,000 marketing agencies in the US alone. Like people need help. Like most of them don't know like the right process and the right way to go about doing it. And they want that to kind of be baked in to how they go about doing it. And so we try to solve for all three. Some companies need more tech and slightly less people and still some process, and every brand is pretty different. But you'll be surprised, like even AI native companies like Lovable, like we're able to accelerate their growth quite a bit and move really fast.
Hey, Marcel, maybe just take a step back, and I think we'll come back to the people, process, tech comment that you made later. I think those are all key parts of kind of what we like to unpack here. But maybe just take a step back, and I think both Arvind and I probably hear this in our board meeting. I'm sure you hear it from your customers. Like, it just feels like the traditional channels of marketing have either gotten like super expensive, really ineffective. Like, it just gotten to be, it's like just top of funnel has gotten so hard. And this is very specific to B2B software, but it feels like AI should be able to do something different. And I'm curious, given that you're kind of on the forefront of it, like what changes with AI? Like what does AI, like what's the breakthrough that AI enables as far as marketing goes? Like, why is it going to be easier for B2B companies to be able to market? And maybe that's because they work with you, but how do you see the future of marketing?
Maybe this is going to come off the wrong way, but I think AI is making it harder, not easier for companies.
I love it. I love spicy takes. Go for it.
Yeah. I think AI is making it harder, and here's why. Because it's amplifying crap and sloppiness and lack of clarity, right? And that's most companies. Most companies lack clarity. Most companies don't know how to define who they're for, aka their ICP and their personas and their audience. Most companies don't have clarity on what they're building and why they're building and what pain points they're solving for that audience. Most companies don't have clarity on their go-to-market strategy and or how to package what they do and how to price it, right? And so because they don't have clarity on the context, then they can't possibly delegate to AI. So then AI ends up scaling just slop, right? It's just like crap. And you'd be surprised. I mean, we work with even public companies, and we come in and they have clarity on things, but it's very, very noisy. You say, hey, do you have a document that just clearly defines your products and what it does and what doesn't do? And it's like, well, there's stuff on our website. There's a bunch of docs over here, but these are the 6 product categories we have, and there's a leader for each one of those and a bunch of people. Can you go interview all of them and then like come back and tell me this, because I've been asking my product marketing team for this for like 6 months and they still are not capable of doing this yet. So we would love that if you can come up with it, right? And it's like, hey, do you have like any source of truth that defines like your features and kind of like your solutions compared to like all the other players in the market that you care about? No. Okay. So you want me to do a product comparison, but you don't even have that information, right? Like, okay. Do you have the personas? Well, kind of, but like not a lot. And like we're for this, but then the buyer is different than the user. And then like, and we're thinking of actually like changing into a different type of persona, right? Like those are all like the important contexts that companies just don't have clarity. And so I think like AI is making it harder because it's adding so much more noise into the market. And most companies are just bad at the principles that make AI more valuable for companies. What to me, that is like clarity of thought, which that usually means you're really good at writing and organizing your thoughts and having really good context. And the companies have been good at that, like HashiCorp, like they've just been really intentional about creating an asynchronous culture that forces people to organize their thoughts into writing in order to communicate in first principles, right? The second one is like first principles thinking, is like decomposing the work and trying to codify like what is the way we go about doing work, and which then leads to the third part, which is delegation, right? Most people are really shitty managers and they're just really bad at delegation. So if most people inside a company are bad at writing, don't think from first principles, and are not good managers and don't know how to delegate, in order to be good at delegating, you need to be able to describe what you're trying to achieve, why you're doing what you're doing. You need to be able to define what done looks like and what quality looks like, and the goal and the purpose and what you're heading towards and how you're going to measure that, right? Most people cannot do that for their jobs and their functions. And so then you throw AI into that equation and a bunch of infrastructure, a bunch of technology, and you have, okay people at times that don't have the right process of going about it, and the tech's not going to solve that. So it's just going to add noise to the whole equation.
So it's actually interesting, and I want to come back to or bring this back to the people comment you made earlier. in many ways, what you just described, Marcel, like the key of all of this is getting the right context, and the right context from people that understand the function really well. I mean, obviously, you're a subject matter expert, so that helps a lot in the clarity of thought and kind of the first principles thinking. But I think you had also made the comment that you try to hire folks from like Stripe and just like very high quality engineers to go build this stuff. They may not necessarily understand the process and the workflow. So how do you kind of get either the right context from the customer, especially if the customer is dealing with some of the challenges that you talked about? And how do you get everybody to understand what good is? Because good is obviously going to be different for everybody. And where I'm going with the question is, A, just trying to understand how do you architect an AI first company? How do you bring the right human context as you build on top of agents? But then the other part of the question is, in an AI world, this seems like a way to differentiate. And so how do you get the people piece of it right to be able to differentiate for the long run?
Yeah, like we think about it as different roles, and I think it's always evolving. And so I don't think we know the perfect answer here, but we break down the company into build versus deliver. And so you can think of deliver as forward deploy talent, and build as building the systems that then power everything else in our ability to deliver and help companies achieve the outcomes they care about, right? And then on the deliver side, like the way to kind of think about it is you have process architects. So these are people that are figuring out like what is the best way to go do research on a topic, right? And how do you decompose, hey, I need to learn about this topic, into the right questions and figure out the right sources to go vet from. How do you define quality? How do you enrich and extend that knowledge? How do you make sure it's done, and how do you evaluate that mission, that research mission? Like those are all things that then have to be distilled, right? So you're a process architect, and you're thinking through the process, the expert process, and then codifying that into something that can be more reproducible and scalable, right? Then you have like input calibrators. And so ideally your input calibrators are the people that are asking the right questions. They're finding the right inputs and pulling those right inputs, processing those right inputs in the right way, and then translating that into context that can actually be used in execution by both humans and workflows and agents, right? And so that might be as simple as like when we do a kickoff, like we have all this company context, all this research, and it's translating into what are the right questions we need to ask the stakeholder in order to understand what they're trying to do, why they're doing what they're doing, who they're for, and whatnot, right? If they give you a dump of 100 files, like what do you do with that? Like, how do you translate that into the right mental models, the frameworks, the inputs, the docs, the right words, right? And that's a constant thing. It's not a set and forget. Like it's constantly changing. Like companies are pivoting. They're adding new products, new features. They're learning more about their customer, the use cases, the pain points. Like it's not a static thing. It's a very dynamic thing, but it's not a robot only or a human only thing. Like you want to ideally use both. And this is where I don't think you're going to completely abstract humans from that equation, because there's like a nuance that when you're in a meeting, when you're like talking to someone, there's like some nuances there that I don't think AI is quite there to completely abstract it away. And the human creativity is able to connect the dots in a way that's really magical, I think, and bringing that judgment into it. And then the final one's like output bar raisers, like in a great hiring process, right? You might have a good process of hiring. You might have a great framework for defining what great looks like. You might have, a person, the input calibrator, interviewing those people, but then you also need an output bar raiser. And those people are there to like keep raising the bar. And with every output, like looking at it and going, hey, you missed here, or you missed that, or looking at flags, right? And finding failure modes is one way to think about it, right? Just like with post-training data, right? Like you're trying to take these models and you're trying to find what are the failure modes of these models. And we're trying to find what are the failure modes of this process, of this workflow, of the work that we're trying to do, and trying to systematically address those failure modes, and not just trying to one-off Band-Aid it, and get it shipped, right? And so like those are the roles that we kind of think about it. And I think they apply to not just like a delivery org, but to like any organization. And then on the build side, right? Like you're trying to figure out where tech fits into that and how to build AI in the right way. And I always love this principle from HashiCorp, which was workflow before technology. Once you have clarity of what like the work should be, then you can figure out how technology can enable that work, in the right way. And so we always approach it that way, like workflow before technology. And then from a strategy and go-to-market perspective, it's about like being effective and efficient, right? Effective is heading in the right direction and in the right order. And then efficient is going as fast as possible once you have confidence that you're going in the right direction, in the right order, And so that's kind of like some of my mental models, I guess, that I borrow or learn from the different companies I work for and from just like trying to figure out what works,
This is a good crash course for anybody who's building a company at this stage, I suppose. I think amongst the noisiness that you're already dealing with your customers and their own internal noisiness, while you're building your product and delivering outcomes as a service, let's also layer on another complexity, and that's the foundational model companies or companies that you think highly of, and they have a core technology, but they're also sort of taking a bit more of like a FDE approach, right? And it could be applied to different verticals potentially or workflows. Do you worry about them? Where do you? I mean, I'm supposing you do, but where do you think they could fall short, I suppose?
So we have two build principles that are really important to us. The first one is ride the model wave, and the second one is build it in a way that with every output, the next one gets better, faster, cheaper, and more impactful, right? Like, and if we can build it in a way that those two things are true, we're in a very good position. So the way, like, how we're building things for us, and that's why we started with our framework, our agent workflow framework. We're actually open sourcing that very, very soon. And so, stay tuned. Depending on when this episode comes out, it might already be out. But so the whole idea is, I have this vision that it's how do we make marketing, go to market, and really like knowledge work more like engineering, right? And knowledge work never had a GitHub moment. And because of that, they haven't had a Cursor Claude Code moment either. So that's a shame, right? That's a shame because, like, if you think about, let's take a Deloitte, McKinsey, right? Like, what makes McKinsey great or whatever? It's like the process of how they go about that. It's the knowledge they have in-house. It's all of that. At best, that's spread around like a bunch of docs. And that's never codified. And so like with HashiCorp, like Terraform made infrastructure as code like possible, right? To be able to scale things. And in software, you have your source code, you have your repos, you have like your pull requests, you have like PRDs, you have documentation that's really good. And every interaction and everything now it's being learned, right? Like with Cursor, Claude Code, like they're ingesting all those interactions, those decisions and whatnot, and getting better, right? And I don't think the ChatGPT and even Claude are trying to play that role in the same way, in the same primitives. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for companies to figure that out in a way that's more open source and where you own that data, right? Like every single day, like the decision between changing a sentence, between how you go about the workflow, like the actual processes of going about and delivering an outcome or an output, right? Like that is literally frontier data. Like the reason like Surge, one of our customers, Mercer and others are worth so much money and making so much money right now is because that is literally the kind of data that companies will pay an obscene amount of money for, right? It's the expert decision, the judgment calls, the A or B, the prioritize this, the explain why you did that, is defining those failure modes, right? Except the only ones benefiting from it are the foundational models, and they're paying hundreds of millions of dollars for that data. But every single day, companies are producing that data if they just had a way to capture that data and use it to make the next output better, right? And so I think that's the primitive of how I think about it. All our systems, like our platform, our infrastructure, everything we're doing is trying to do that, is capturing these expert processes, the way we go about doing work in a way that's in code and as code, and that can be plugged into a coding agent. You have, really powerful runtime layer and observability layer that just understands both human interventions as well as workflow executions and agent executions, set evals and things like that, and then it's ingesting all these different signals that you can learn from. And part of those signals are the human intervention signals that we're capturing as well. And then the next piece now is like, how do you use that to then create ideally what eventually becomes an auto learning loop, which is what AI was supposed to do, right? AI was supposed to get smarter automatically over time. But instead it's like a bunch of scientists with a bunch of data centers trying to make it smarter,
Yeah, and obviously I think this is where vertical companies probably have the advantage, because in your case, for example, the context around, what content was tried, the output, did the user like it or not? How did that content then ultimately, how did it work when you actually put it into the wild, the conversion rates and stuff? You guys have that entire funnel. But I guess this kind of comes back to a data problem and a context engineering problem that I was curious to get your thoughts on. One of the things that we've been talking about internally at Sierra around context is it's context is temporal, hierarchical and context dependent, and like solving to give the right context. For example, like if you have a new product launch, and you're doing an event around that, like the content that's tailored for that's going to be different than if you're launching a more generic like SEO campaign or an AI optimization campaign. How have you guys kind of thought about building that foundational layer internally and making sure that the users can keep it up to date, or you guys can keep it up to date, so that the output actually ends up working correctly? Because that to me seems like one of the hardest technical and product problems that will need to be solved to get AI to really work.
Yeah, it's kind of like the solving that last mile. Sometimes it can take 10 times longer and harder, right? And so you have to narrow the scope. And we've been working on self-driving cars for 20 plus years, and that's not even counting all the OG work that was done in computer vision, and there's still more than one human per vehicle on Waymo, right? Like if you do the research, like, so there's still humans, they're just not in the car, and then you look at a self-driving car and you have like all these systems, all these components, all these different models. It's not like one, perception model that does the whole thing automagically, right? And I think people are trying to solve knowledge work in an overly simplistic way. Like one LLM is going to just do everything and completely replace like 1,000 components and become a whole system in of itself. And I think the companies that are more forward deployed, that are owning more of the outcomes or working really closely with customers to optimize for those outcomes, all realize you need humans in the loop. But you need humans in the loop in a way that you can capture like those decisions and that data, and in that context as well, right? And so to answer your question, is like right now, part of coming up with the first version of the context, and we call artifacts, right? Like description of your company, like all those nuances, is us ingesting a bunch of documents and using workflows, but it's also us talking to people and doing deep dives and asking questions. And the questions we ask is informed by our workflows and our researchers as well, right? Like our AI researchers. And so then what happens is like, I can then take those inputs and again, use AI to help process that and figure out how to tweak these artifacts. But then once you're actually executing and deliver outputs, now it's about like understanding and having some of that judgment call. And we haven't yet figured out a way to completely automate that. And so that's where you do need people in the loop that are very smart, but also understand how workflows and how agents work, right? And I think like there's this big transition that has happened with us, at least, was like at first we had to decompose everything down to be like, maybe it's 100 or 1,000 steps, right? And really figuring out like all of those. And so you almost like kind of like spread them out. And once you gain confidence on like this is working, then you can almost like collapse it back into agentic loops, right? And but that part is really, really hard because like to get agents right, like you can't overwhelm them. Like a clear example here is like we used to have workflows to do writing guidelines, right? And to enforce like writing guidelines and how a company wants to sound. And it used to be this like really long document with a lot of rules, a lot of guidelines and things like that. Like if you took that and you feed that as an artifact into an agent, the agent's going to try to like overfit that and try to over optimize and try to, optimize for 100 rules. And that it just breaks. So then we had to decompose that down and figure out like what is the right evals to set for these agents and limit like how many loops and know when it gets stuck to then like, escalate back up to a supervisor that then holds more of the context, how much context you give to the sub agents versus the main one, and like that stuff is hard. And the risk there is like you go into a science project for the next 6 months and you come out of it with this like, rocket ship when someone just needed a fucking bike to get across the street. It's like, God damn it. Like, and then those 6 months, your competitors just move fast and actually deliver outcomes and move numbers. Right. Like, and so we're trying to like not go too far into a science project, but also not do it in a way that's just like one off that doesn't build leverage over time. And I think that's the hard line. And so like a lot of what we've done is have a forward deploy AI engineer with each one of our pods, and our pods are the ones that are kind of like forward deployed to customers, right? So that they're there thinking about how do I build leverage into this, but they're also understand the domain that they're in, which in our case is content marketing and growth,
Mm-hmm. Well, all good things kind of move too quick, and then we are finishing up very quickly into our time here. But I just wanted to shift gears a bit, Marcel. I think AI just is throwing content at us at a great velocity, right? I mean, maybe you can choose to disagree or agree. And if that is true, then I guess brands, companies, everyone is struggling with visibility. And there enters AEO, this magical term that everyone throws around. But I think AEO does solve in some form or shape the construct of visibility, but you can also argue that some of the foundational models could get to that layer, especially the ones that are more consumer focused. We shall name no names here, but I think that's not enough. I think it also needs to go into the workflow to enable the brand, the company, to do something with the visibility that they get. So too much content leads to visibility diminishing. Enter AEO, and then you are stuck with, okay, I'm visible now, but what do I do with that? How is that actionable, right? So if you follow that train of thought, I mean, what do you think about the AEO scene setup today, and where do you think it should go?
Yeah. I'm fortunate enough to get to talk to a lot of CMOs, and the number of eye rolls I get when the topic of AEO comes up is always like fun to see, so for me, there's you got to separate things, right? Like on one end, there is a fundamental behavioral change, which is AI is there, and I can use it personally, and I can get to answers and more comprehensive answers and feed it a lot more context than I could before. That is a fundamental change because it's a technological change that's driving a behavioral change, right? And so that's great. That benefits all of us, right? So now the question becomes, as more people are spending time with these platforms and services, what happens to brands that used to be able to cheat, essentially, right? They used to be able to just like stuff keywords, or they used to be able to just like create okay-ish at best content and be one of those 10 links, or which most company did, just pay a little more to show up a little higher, right? And now they don't get that. There is no advertisement in ChatGPT yet. It will come up, right? They are hiring for it. They've already hired for it, right? Like it's going to be there, right? Like, but it is a fundamental shift. Now, not all search is shifting to that. Like people are still using search. And so there's different types of searches or different types of like interactions that happen in these AI platforms, right? And it's additive, like it's actually augmenting and increasing the overall pie, and it's not necessarily taking away a bunch of pie or a bunch of the share from search, right? And so I think like that's an important distinction. Now brands are trying to figure out, hey, how do I have better and the right kind of visibility into AI answers, in addition to search visibility as well, when people actually know what they're searching for and they're still searching. And then for us, like, it goes back to the same principles, which is like, it all starts with getting the right context. The right context means you have a deeper understanding of your audience and who you're for. And then for that audience, how do you figure out what are the most important fundamental questions that they try to answer along their entire journey within the context that you're in, right? So Ramp and Brax are customers, like they're, Navan is a customer. So let's say you're going after an accounting or a finance manager, right? Well, there's like all the kinds of questions that they might ask in relation to their job, right? Like, how do I get a job? Like, what are the things I need to do? Who do I work with? What are my work deliverables? What are the metrics? Like, what are the ways and tools I can use and things like that? Those are all questions that come up. And you just, as a brand, ideally want to become the best resource to those questions, the best answer to those questions systematically, right? And that's the foundation of like a strategy of how do you become the best answer and build credibility and eventually turn that into distribution and conversions, right? And so in some ways, there's a fundamental behavior change. But from a marketer's perspective, I think it's a signal, right? It's a very important signal. It's a strong signal, but it's not the only signal you have, right? You have transcripts on your sales calls that you can learn from, right? ChatGPT and others, they're just a black box. There's no such thing as like prompt volume, right? Like no one types the same prompt over and over again. And so all these services are just trying to create essentially custom research projects, and they want every brand to come up with 1,000 new prompts and say, hey, look, my visibility is growing. I won't get fired as a marketer, right? And I think we're fundamentally taking a different approach. And what we're doing is like, we already have to collect a lot of this data. And so we're actually opening up an entire index of over 100,000 prompts that will be open and free for anyone to access, that are more in the buying evaluation category for B2B brands, right? Like, and so those are the questions that actually matter for brands, because those are the ones that when you search best expense management tools, those are the kinds of things that you want to know, like those are the high intent ones. And that's where we focus a lot of our attention on as far as like the signals. And then it comes down to execution and how do you scale quality, so.
As you talk about AEO and some of the things that a company needs to do in order to get that part of it right, but just in general, be able to cut through the noise of this increased volume of content. I think it brings up another interesting topic, Marcel, which is what does the shape of a company look like in the next 4 to 5 years? Because the skill sets that you're talking about are fundamentally going to be different. A lot of it is like the clarity of thinking, the ability to think from first principles, versus like, hey, do you know how to run this process? Do you know how to run that? It's not going to be workflow driven. And I'm curious, based on the way you're building your company and what you're seeing from your sophisticated customers, like what does a marketing organization of the future look like? Is it fewer people? Is it different types of people? Like how does it look?
Yeah. I don't think there's a single answer. I go back to the roles I mentioned previously, right? Where some people are just really good at connecting dots and asking the right questions and getting the right inputs, like input calibrators, right? Other people are more into the process, the tech, the workflows of like, building leverage and efficiency, right? These are like kind of like your AI native, like ops people, right? Like they're not called ops today because some of them focus too much on the technology, other focus too much on just the plain automation, but it's like, hey, how can I make my sales process more efficient, right? Like, what is the way I go about doing that, for example, right? And then I think you just still need a lot of people with good taste and good context that are just like the bar raisers along the way. And I think that in of itself, like, I think applies to almost any function. And what we're seeing with companies like Lovable and others, it's like the caliber of people, they tend to be a bit more seasoned, or people that are just like your top 1%. Operators, and they're hands-on, and they're doing everything themselves as well and building leverage for themselves. And so I think the teams seems to be getting smaller in a lot of cases. There are people that are more T-shaped. and very intellectually curious, and a few folks are just like incredibly good at one thing. Like if I'm gonna scale an outbound function, what do I want? Like I don't want to like 20 garbage SDRs to spam people and copy and paste shitty prompts into ChatGPT and send that. Like I want like the world's most like the best copywriter in the planet, right? The world's most effective, most persuasive person in the planet. I want a subject matter expert in my persona, right? Like to tell me how that person thinks, you know, and how to appeal to that person. Like, right? Like I want that. And then I want to distill that into things that scale, you know, because if you try to scale garbage, it's just going to continue to be garbage. You can't, you know, polish garbage into gold. You just can't, you know.
Well, I think we talked about a lot of positive things about, what you're building, where companies are morphing into and how they're getting to adopt all of this. But look, I think if you look at the last maybe couple of weeks, I think the markets have kind of pulled back a bit. I guess they have, gotten back higher a bit more over the last couple of days. But the core message there is that there was some concern that, hey, is this a bubble? So if you were to sort of take the other side of the argument that why this whole thing is a bubble, and this has got nothing to do, it doesn't have to be anything to do with marketing, it's just crystal ball gazing. How do you think this bubble could burst? I mean, like, what do you think? Is it like customers not seeing ROI fast enough, or is it just disillusionment in other ways? It's an open-ended question. Feel free.
Yeah. I tend to think more about what are the fundamental things that have staying power. What are the things that will continue to be true regardless if there's a bubble or not, you know? And I think in that sense, maybe it's more of a positive approach to or view into things, but it's like at the end of the day, every single knowledge worker in the planet has to retool themselves. And then what are the skills, the things that even if the tools change and the platforms change are still true? And it's like first principles thinking. It's like really good writing and organizing your thoughts, right? It's having intellectual curiosity. It's, it's having good taste and understanding that. It's like a lot of those things, like knowing how to be better delegators, and so if like you get good at those things and you become AI native and you retool yourself, you're just going to be 10 times more valuable than the next person. And I think like that's more of like what I try to tell people is like, just become indispensable and just become AI native. And then, really work on these fundamental principles that, that will set you up for success in using AI effectively, and just don't waste a work deliverable or chance to actually use it as an experiment to learn, right? If I'm writing a memo for the company, I don't just write it like that. That to me is a waste. Like I'll write it, but I'll also use like 3 or 4 things in parallel, and that's my way to like probing the frontier of like what these things are and the limits and things like that. And that's what it means to be AI native to me. Is like really fundamentally understanding. It's like, you don't become a sommelier by just reading 100 books, like that's not how you become AI native either. And you kind of have to taste and test and know what great looks like. So if you don't know what great looks like, go do the 10,000 hours of work to know what great looks like and become that, right? Become obsessed with that. And then as far as bubble, like what I try to be careful of is like, what are the complexes that drive things under the hood, like the VC industrial complex, right? Like, why are they pushing for companies to burn so much money? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing, right? Like in some cases can be okay to like just be aggressive and VCs enable like all these startups to exist, and that's like very positive. And in other ways, it kind of pushes towards like unsustainable principles of how to run a successful business with staying power and generational, impact. And so like for me, I try to be careful of that. Maybe not just necessarily as a bubble, but it's like, is this the right principle or the wrong operational principle here? Is this like founded in something that makes sense or not? And it's above my pay grade, these whole like, committing $1 trillion that you don't have in the bank to build data centers that might not exist for another 10 years. Like, and then company valuation skyrocketing based on commitments of contracts that haven't yet, become a real thing. And, it's like, that feels like, bubblish, bubbly, if you will, but that's above my pay grade. So I try to, at the end of the day, if you're, as a partner to our customers, if we're their best hire, we'll be okay, no matter what, and if we build a company, we've been cash flow positive last 2 months. Not to say we're opposed to burning a little bit of money, but being in charge of our own destiny and building maybe like not just like speed to slop, speed to just getting something surface level, but like really building from the right primitives. I think like I think are really, really awesome. And I tend to be more inspired by companies like Basecamp versus like an Asana, right? Like Asana just turned, I think, their first profit or something. They burned up $1.5 billion to get there. Their market cap now is $3 billion. Basecamp is probably hundreds of millions of dollars a year, highly profitable, amazing talent. They've built open source. They've contributed back to the community. We've had a couple of hires from them, and it's like insanely amazing, smart people. So it's there's something in between those two that I think could be really, really awesome.
And I think this is one of the questions that I think about as well. I think you're right. They're like when in times like this, I think the question you always got to ask is like, is the thing that you're doing the right thing for your company in at this moment? But I think it's also in some ways become quite challenging, and I think your perspective on this would be helpful. Like with this whole 996 sort of culture, there's this always on culture. I feel like sometimes you're just running, but you're not always thinking. And I think the decompression and finding time to really think about how do you stay motivated, how do you build the right way, becomes important. So how do you find time to take a step back, decompress, and really think about the future for yourself, the future for your company?
Yeah, you have to be really, really protective of your energy levels and not just your time, I think, and so I think for I'm probably not the greatest yet at this, but I try to get home by a certain time and then spend time with my 2-year-old and my wife and like try to protect that a little bit. Not always great at it, so still working on that. But and then I try to cluster my days quite a bit and have an entire support system. So I have a EA, a chief of staff. My chief of staff has an EA. I'm hiring a second chief of staff. And so my time, my co-founder CTO time is like we have the most context and we're the most invested in this company to succeed. And so every minute of our time and making sure that minute is like with the right energy levels, right? So like protecting my mornings, the times that are more clear-minded, and then just not context switching so much, especially as a founder CEO, you context switch so much. And then just being intentional, like on what is the thing that everything else can drop that I'm gonna go focus on, and like having that clarity, and then building like operational excellence actually like helps because then you have clarity on the lanes and who's doing what, and knowing that hey, these lanes over here, it might not operate even remotely out of what it could if I was involved, but that's okay because I'm choosing to do this and say no to all these other things. Being ruthless about turning down revenue because sales is kind of easy in some ways, at least for us. And it's like, it's easy to say yes to all the revenue. We have like a 3-stage qualification process. And like, honestly, like the hardest thing that drains energy away is when you say yes to the wrong things, aka the wrong customers or customers that you can't make successful and things like that. That just like distracts everything. And so as Karan, who's on our board from Madrona says, like, use revenue as a fuel, not as a drug. Use sales as a fuel, not as a drug. And so those are some of the things. And I think the whole like work to death is just like not sustainable. And it's just like a lazy way of just saying like, be busier, not more effective, and if you can, it's like, whoever can get to $1 trillion market cap and be working 20 hours a week, like good for them. Like that's amazing. That should be the challenge. And then you're working your ass off to get to that point. Not you're working your ass off to work harder. Like that like defeats the purpose. Like I don't want to work 100 hours a week to be able to work 200 hours a week. Like that's like I'm working harder to work less later. But or to choose what I work on even better. Like because I'm energized by the work.
Love the hot takes.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you're decompress has to do with saying no more. That's kind of I guess that works too. You kind of conserve energy, but as I mentioned earlier, time just flew by, Marcel, and I think we are at the end of this session here, but really appreciate you. And if I could sort of string the thoughts here, I think we talked a bit about, what is the nature of the marketing function and how's that evolved, and how you guys are stepping in to sort of take a lot off the plate of that function. But at the same time, we debated about, how the future of visibility looks and how either you guys are working or other people are working on it. And of course, we are wrapping it up with how you guys are decompressing. So appreciate you sort of taking the time, and thanks again for coming onto this pod, Marcel.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it, Marcel. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Unpacked podcast. Big thanks again to Stifel Bank for Geodesic Capital's fund banking needs and my own personal wealth management. They remain a trusted partner. Please remember to subscribe, and we will see you soon. Thank you.